They laughed at Socrates, imprisoned Galileo, and ignored Tesla. Why? Because truth makes people uncomfortable. Have you ever felt that the deeper you think, the lonelier you become? That the more you try to understand the world, the less people seem willing to listen? Maybe you have shared an idea you thought was meaningful, only to be met with blank stares, or worse, an awkward silence. If so, you are not imagining it. Society has always had a strange relationship with deep thinkers, and not because those thinkers are wrong, but because they see what most people do not want to see. History makes this painfully clear. Socrates was forced to drink poison. Galileo was threatened by the church. Tesla died alone and broke, not because they lacked intelligence, but because their ideas made people uncomfortable. You see, people do not fear muscles. They do not fear money. They do not even really fear beauty. But intelligence, that is a different story. Intelligence challenges identity, and identity is sacred. Think about it. If you stand next to someone who is physically stronger, you might feel impressed. You might even admire them. If you meet someone wealthier, you might feel a little envy, but it does not shake your sense of self. But intelligence, real depth, cuts deeper. Because we define ourselves by what we believe, by how we think, by the little mental stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how the world works. When someone comes along with sharper insights, or a way of seeing that we never considered, it feels personal. It feels like a crack in the mirror of our own identity. And people do not forgive that easily. Psychologists even have a name for this. They call it the mirror effect. A deep thinker does not just bring new ideas into the room. They reflect back the limitations of everyone else. And that reflection is uncomfortable. You do not even have to say much. Your presence alone, the way you notice things, the way you connect dots, the way you ask questions others would rather avoid, it makes people uneasy. Now, here is where it gets fascinating. Neuroscience has shown that when people feel intellectually outmatched, the fear center of their brain, the amygdala, lights up just as if they were facing a real physical threat. In other words, intelligence can trigger the same survival response as danger. That is wild if you think about it. You are not attacking anyone, you are not threatening them physically, but their brain reacts as though you are. Why would the brain do that? The answer is hidden in evolution. For most of human history, survival did not depend on knowing the truth. It depended on being accepted by the group. If your tribe rejected you, and your chances of survival dropped, safety came from belonging. So our brains developed to protect us from anything that might risk social exile. Now, fast forward to the present day. When you walk into a group and start questioning the status quo, when you introduce new ways of thinking, that old survival wiring kicks in. People sense a threat, not to their body, but to their place in the group, and they push back. This is why you may have noticed something strange. One-on-one conversations often feel easier. Someone might actually lean in when you share a thoughtful perspective. They may even respect it. But take that same idea into a group setting, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. People joke, dismiss, or even attack. Why? Because in groups, social standing matters more. Nobody wants to look small in front of others. So when a deep thinker makes them feel outshined, their instinct is to bring the thinker down. Not always consciously. Often it is subtle, a shrug, a quick change of subject, a laugh that dismisses your point. But the effect is the same. You are pushed to the edge. And this does not just happen in casual conversations. It happens everywhere. In classrooms, the student who asks the difficult questions is labeled as disruptive. In workplaces, the employee who suggests a new approach is seen as a troublemaker. In politics, the leader who tells uncomfortable truths rarely wins against the one who tells comforting lies. Time and time again, the lesson is clear. People say they value intelligence, but they value comfort far more. And maybe you have felt that in your own life. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is for someone loud and confident to be taken seriously, even if what they are saying is shallow? Meanwhile, the one who speaks with nuance, who carefully considers complexity, is ignored. Studies show this over and over again. People trust confidence more than competence. That is why charismatic but simplistic voices rise quickly. They are easy to follow. They make people feel safe. Deep thinkers, on the other hand, bring complexity, and complexity makes people uneasy. So here is the paradox: the more you search for truth, the harder it becomes to connect with others. The more clearly you see, the more alone you feel. And this is not just some poetic idea. It is written into the wiring of the human brain. Intelligence forces people to confront their own limitations. And most people will do almost anything to avoid that discomfort. But here is the real tragedy. In a world that desperately needs new ideas, society resists the very people who can provide them. Instead of lifting up thinkers, it sidelines them. Instead of rewarding depth, it rewards performance. Just look at social media. The posts that go viral are not deep essays or carefully reasoned arguments. They are quick sound bites, emotional hooks, and slogans. Depth takes time, but attention spans crave instant hits. The system rewards outrage, controversy, and entertainment, not thought. And yet, here you are, listening, thinking, maybe even nodding in silence, which means there is still hope, because deep thinkers may be rare, but they are not extinct. They are simply scattered, often isolated, often misunderstood. But when they find each other, when they connect, even through something as small as words on a screen or a video like this, the isolation begins to crack. Let us go deeper. If intelligence creates so much discomfort, if society pushes thinkers to the margins, does that mean intelligence itself is a curse? Some philosophers thought so. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest minds in history, believed exactly that. He argued that the smarter a person is, the harder it is for them to connect with others. Not because they are arrogant, not because they are antisocial, but because they simply see too much. Schopenhauer had this concept he called the will. For him, most people live under what he called the will to live. That is the drive for comfort, pleasure, and survival. It is what makes people chase money, status, relationships, and simple distractions. The will to live is not evil. It is just natural. It is instinct. But Schopenhauer said that highly intelligent people operate under something different, the will to truth. They cannot stop themselves from asking why. They cannot look at life only in terms of pleasure and survival. They feel compelled to see things as they are, even if what they find is uncomfortable. And here is where the tragedy begins. The majority of people are satisfied with illusions, stories that make life easier, smoother, more bearable. The deep thinker, on the other hand, tears those illusions apart. And once you see through them, you cannot unsee them. Think about it. Once you recognize how much small talk is just noise, how much social behavior is performance, how much of human ambition is just chasing shadows, how do you go back to enjoying them? You cannot. The veil has been lifted. That is why Schopenhauer said intelligence isolates. Because the more you understand, the less you can participate in the games everyone else is playing. The parties, the gossip, the social rituals. What once felt normal now feels hollow. And the thinker, in trying to be honest with themselves, ends up feeling like a stranger in their own world. You can probably see this in everyday life. Most conversations hover at the surface. Sports, weather, Celebrity gossip, quick jokes, recycled opinions. And there is nothing wrong with that. Surface talk keeps society smooth. It creates bonding without friction. But for the deep thinker, it feels unsatisfying, even suffocating. They crave discussions about meaning, about purpose, about truth. And when those cravings are ignored long enough, they either go quiet or they withdraw. This is why so many intellectuals throughout history have described loneliness as their shadow. Pascal spoke of the endless silence of infinite space. Kafka wrote about the crushing weight of existence. Nietzsche wrestled with despair while reshaping philosophy itself. And Schopenhauer himself admitted that the price of clarity was isolation. His words were brutal. A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial. He did not say this as advice or warning. He said it as a statement of fact. But here is the strange twist. Schopenhauer also believed that this isolation was not entirely a tragedy. He saw solitude not as punishment, but as a privilege. For him, being alone meant freedom from shallow distractions. It meant time to create, to study, to reflect, to write. He even suggested that solitude was where the thinker becomes most alive, because they are no longer pretending to fit into a world that misunderstands them. So, if intelligence isolates, maybe solitude is not the prison. It is the sanctuary. Maybe the loneliness of the thinker is not a sign of failure, but a natural stage in the journey. Because when you step away from the noise of the crowd, you begin to notice what others never will. You begin to see connections others miss. You begin to understand life at a depth that surface living can never touch. But of course, that does not mean the pain disappears. Knowing that solitude is valuable does not erase the ache of being misunderstood. And here is where things get even more complicated. Modern psychology shows that people value confidence more than intelligence in social settings. That means the thinker who doubts, who questions, who hesitates because they see nuance, often loses influence to the person who speaks with certainty, even if their ideas are shallow. That is why motivational speakers who oversimplify the world attract millions, while philosophers who ask hard questions remain unknown. This pattern is everywhere. Leaders who promise simple answers win elections. Influencers who create flashy, emotional content go viral. Meanwhile, deep discussions struggle to reach even a fraction of the audience. Why? Because people are drawn to what feels easy, not what feels true. The truth is heavy, it demands work. It forces change. And most people, deep down, would rather avoid it. Social media only makes this worse. Algorithms reward outrage, humor, and controversy because those things keep people clicking. But depth requires patience. Depth requires silence, reflection, and time. None of which fits into a 15-second clip. That is why the loudest voices rise, while the deepest voices fade into the background. The system itself is built to amplify noise over thought. So where does that leave the deep thinker today? On one hand, they are more connected than ever. You can find communities online, books, podcasts, places where deep thought is still alive. But at the same time, you are still swimming against the current. The world is not designed to encourage your depth. It is designed to distract you from it. And unless you learn to navigate that tension, it is easy to feel alienated, even hopeless. But perhaps this struggle has always been the mark of the thinker. To be awake in a world that wants to stay asleep is not a comfortable role. It never has been. Socrates died for it. Galileo suffered for it. Tesla starved for it. Nietzsche broke under the weight of it. And yet, without them, where would we be? Every time society rejected them, it was also planting the seeds for its own growth. Their pain became our progress. Which makes me wonder, if you are feeling isolated for thinking too deeply, maybe that loneliness is not a flaw. Maybe it is proof that you are seeing something the world is not ready for yet. Maybe you are carrying the same burden that history's greatest minds carried before you. And maybe, just maybe, your role is not to be accepted now, but to keep the torch lit for the future. Let us step back for a moment. If intelligence so often leads to loneliness, rejection, or even suffering, what is the point of it at all? Why keep thinking deeply if it only isolates you? Why not just silence the questions, blend in, and live in peace like everyone else seems to do? That is the temptation many thinkers face, to give up the weight of awareness and return to the comfort of illusions. But here is the catch. You cannot unsee the truth once you have seen it. You cannot erase your awareness. You can try to drown it in distraction, in entertainment, in conformity, but it always resurfaces. It sits there, whispering in the back of your mind. And if you ignore it too long, it turns into restlessness, frustration, even despair. In other words, deep thinking is not a choice. It is a calling. It chooses you, not the other way around. And that means the real question is not, should you think deeply? But rather, what do you do with the burden of thinking deeply? How do you carry it without breaking under it? How do you live in a world that resists you without turning bitter or detached? One answer lies in community. History shows us that even the most isolated thinkers sought out others who could understand them. Nietzsche had Wagner before they fell apart. Einstein surrounded himself with other physicists, joking, debating, dreaming. Even in solitude, these minds knew the importance of connection. Because isolation may sharpen thought, but conversation gives it breath. To lock your ideas away is to let them starve. To share them, even with just a few people, is to let them grow. But here is the important point: the thinker must be selective. Not everyone deserves your thoughts. Not everyone is ready for them. Throw pearls before swine, and you will only invite scorn. The deep thinker must learn the art of balance, sharing enough to connect, but not so much that it wastes their energy on deaf ears. This is not elitism. It is survival. Another answer lies in creativity. Many of the most brilliant minds found relief not in conversation, but in creation. Kafka poured his alienation into stories that still shake readers today. Dostoevsky turned his suffering into novels that reveal the human soul in all its contradictions. Van Gogh, misunderstood and mocked in his own time, left behind paintings that now move millions. Creation transforms isolation into legacy. It turns private pain into public meaning. And there is also a psychological truth here. Studies on flow, the state of deep, focused immersion, show that people are happiest not when they are distracted, but when they are engaged in meaningful work. For the thinker, that means the cure for loneliness is not endless socializing, but purposeful creation. When you write, paint, research, or build, you are not just escaping the world. You are shaping it. Of course, that does not erase the cost. Every thinker still faces moments of despair. But there is a strange kind of dignity in that despair. It means you are alive to reality. You are not sleepwalking through life. And perhaps that is why history remembers the deep thinkers with reverence. Because they felt what most people refused to feel. They carried the burden others ignored. They looked into the abyss, and even if it broke them, it also gave them a vision the world desperately needed. But let us be honest. Not every thinker becomes a Nietzsche or a Tesla. Most will not be remembered in history books. Most will live ordinary lives, working jobs, raising families, blending into the flow of society. And yet, that does not make their depth meaningless. In fact, it may be even more important. Because the survival of truth does not depend only on the great names. It depends on the quiet carriers of depth, the teachers, the writers, the parents, the friends, who keep asking questions, who refuse to settle for illusions, who keep a spark of awareness alive in their corner of the world. Think about it this way. Every great movement in history began not with masses, but with a few. A few people who saw differently, who thought differently, who resisted the easy answers. Without them, society would stagnate. Without them, progress would stop. That means if you feel isolated because of your thoughts, you may already be playing that role. You may already be part of that small group holding up the torch of depth in a shallow age. And there is something else too, compassion. The thinker must guard against arrogance. It is easy, when you see more, to look down on those who see less. But arrogance isolates even more. The wiser path is compassion, to recognize that most people are not avoiding truth out of malice, but out of fear. Life is hard enough without carrying unnecessary weight. Not everyone can handle the same depth, and that is okay. The role of the thinker is not to despise others for living lightly, but to carry the weight willingly, and to share it gently when the time is right. So what does this all mean for you, right now? In your life, it means that if you feel isolated for your thoughts, you are not broken. You are not cursed. You are walking a path that countless others have walked before you. It is not easy, but it is meaningful. It means your loneliness is not just emptiness. It is the sign of depth. And if you can bear it, if you can channel it into creation, connection, and compassion, then your suffering will not be wasted. It will ripple outward in ways you may never fully see. And perhaps that is the final paradox of deep thinking. The thinker feels most alienated in the present, but it is the thinker who ends up shaping the future. Society may reject you now, but it may one day stand on the foundations you are laying. That has always been the way of history. The present mocks its prophets. The future builds statues to them. So the question is not whether deep thinking is easy. It never has been, and it never will be. The question is whether you are willing to carry it, to live with the tension, to walk with the weight, to stand in the storm of misunderstanding and still keep asking, still keep seeking, still keep creating. Because in the end, the world does not advance through those who follow the crowd. It advances through those who are willing to stand apart. And if you are one of them, then yes, you may be isolated, you may be rejected, you may even be forgotten. But you will also be what the world secretly needs most, a mind that refuses to sleep. And maybe that, in the quiet of your own solitude, is enough. Perhaps intelligence is not a blessing or a curse. It is simply a mirror. It shows us truths others prefer to ignore. It isolates us, yes, but it also gives us the power to create, to question, to shape the future. So if you feel alone because you think too deeply, remember this: you are not broken. You are awake. And in a sleeping world, even one awake mind can change everything.